Hey guys, so we'll be taking a look at the 8 Senate races that actually matter on the ballot this November. Yes, we have 35 races, but really it is going to come down to these 8. These are the 8 states that could reasonably vote for both parties. I mean, in states like Washington or Colorado, are the Republicans realistically going to win these states? No, they have basically no chance. And are the Democrats really going to win in Missouri or Florida? No, the Republicans are going to carry these 2 states. So really it is going to come down to these 8 races, these states of Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These are the races that are truly going to matter. And in all of these races, the Democratic Party, compared to just a month ago, the Democratic Party is in a much better position in every single one of these races. So today we're going to go into a much more in-depth analysis of the key Senate races this November, these 8 races. So we have 3 tilt races in the states of Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. These are races that really could very easily go both ways, that one party does have a very slight edge, and in the other 5 lean states, these are states in which one party does have a clear advantage, but it is still going to be a highly competitive race. So I'm going to start off with the state of Arizona. In Arizona, Mark Kelly is running for his first full term in office. He was, of course, elected in 2020 against Martha McSally. He won 51.2% of the vote. It was a margin of 2.4% for him just 2 years ago. In 2018, Kyrsten Sinema won her Senate seat by the same margin, also against Martha McSally. So the Democratic Party is doing very well in Arizona, just based on the last couple of election results. The state of Arizona simply is not the state that it was before. You look at the 2020 election results, Joe Biden won by 0.3%. 2016, Trump won Arizona by 3.5%. And in 2012, Arizona voted for Mitt Romney by 9.1%. So Arizona had a very long Republican voting history, and that has just been shattered over the last 2 years. The Democrats now hold both Senate seats in Arizona, and they also won it on the presidential level. Of course, the GOP does still lead in terms of the state partisanship, in terms of voting. The Republican Party does still have a slight advantage. It is still a state that has a very long Republican history. The Democratic Party has just been very energized over the last couple of election cycles. We're going to have to see if that happens again this November, because of course Joe Biden is not exactly the most popular president in the world. However, a lot of these Republicans that are being nominated are not popular in their states either, so that is also going to hurt them. So even though Joe Biden is hurting Democrats nationwide, the candidates that the GOP is putting up is also hurting them to a pretty significant degree as well. If you look at the latest polling between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters, currently Mark Kelly is doing very well in the polls. There have only been 2 polls released, and I mean the primary is not even over yet. It will be decided early next month, and Blake Masters is highly expected to end up being the nominee. He did win the endorsement of Donald Trump. So Mark Kelly, clearly, he's not going to win anything close to a 10-point margin or double digits. It's going to be very, very close. I think he will actually win by a smaller margin than 2020, but I do think that as of right now, he does have a very slight advantage going into this race. And I mean, just look at the money. He has raised so much more money than Blake Masters, and I mean, this is why incumbents have such an advantage when they're going into elections. They have years to fundraise, and of course Blake Masters was stuck in a primary, so the money within the GOP base here is being split between all of the candidates in Arizona. And the Arizona primary for the Senate election has been an absolute mess. There's been so many ups and downs for so many candidates, but Blake Masters, it seems, is going to end up on top. If you look at the betting markets here for the Arizona Senate race, it's an absolute disaster for the GOP. They had at one point in time, just a couple months ago, a 65% chance at winning this race. Now their odds are all the way down to 52, and so right now the Democratic Party, I mean, their odds of winning re-election with Mark Kelly have increased drastically, and a lot of this came after Roe v. Wade was overturned in late June. And so we're just going to see what happens in this race in the coming months, whether Mark Kelly can keep up this momentum. If you look at the 538 forecast here in Arizona, they currently give Mark Kelly a 58% chance at defeating Blake Masters, and this is the deluxe model. This uses both polling data as well as expert ratings, and of course also fundraising and past voting patterns. So Arizona right now is definitely a race in which the Democratic Party has a very slight advantage in, but it still really could go either way, so we're going to have to keep a close eye on this race for the coming months. Next up is the state of Georgia, another very close race, also held by a Democrat, and also held by a Democrat who won their first election in the 2020 election cycle, this time being Raphael Warnock. He won the special election along alongside Mark Kelly, and of course he will also be on the ballot this November to win his first full 6-year term in office, and he'll be running against Herschel Walker. Walker has basically been the presumptive nominee for a very long time. He is not actually the official nominee, but he was the presumptive nominee for a very long time, and Raphael Warnock does lead in the polling against Herschel Walker. If you look at the latest polls released, Walker has led in the latest poll. However, if you look at the 5 previous polls, Herschel Walker has failed to lead in a single one of them. In this one poll sponsored by Walker's own campaign, it showed an even race here in Georgia, so it is worrying currently for the Republican Party. If you look at the governor's race, I mean, the GOP is doing much better here with Brian Kemp running for re-election. He is ahead of Stacey Abrams by 5.9%, so there's a clear difference between the governor and Senate election here in Georgia, and it's mainly because of the fact that Raphael Warnock is a much better candidate than Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker has a lot of weaknesses. A lot of things he says are just absolutely nonsensical, and his positions on a lot of things simply are not popular in Georgia. Georgia at this point is a purple state. It voted for Joe Biden. So currently I do give the advantage in Georgia very slightly to Raphael Warnock as well. If you look at the betting odds here in Georgia, the Democrats also lead in the markets here as well. And I mean, if you look at the numbers just a couple of months ago, the Democratic Party had a 36% chance of winning. Now they have a 53% chance of winning. They're actually now favored to win the Georgia Senate race, and previously the GOP was expected to win with Herschel Walker for over a year. So I do think that the GOP is going to end up regretting their choice. No matter what, Herschel Walker is not the candidate that he initially seemed like he was. At the beginning, he seemed to be a very strong candidate, but as more things about his past comes out, he is becoming a more and more vulnerable Republican nominee. And if you look at the odds here in the state of Georgia, Raphael Warnock is still actually favored to lose his race, but it is still a very, very close race. Currently, Herschel Walker does have the slight advantage, but we're going to have to track this race and see what happens. There will also be a runoff if no candidate wins a majority, just like there was in 2021. But as of right now, I do have the Democrats with a very slight advantage in the state of Georgia. Now, moving on to the only tilt state I'm going to give to the GOP, and that, of course, is the state of Nevada, where Catherine Cortez Masto is running for her second full term in office. She was first elected in 2016, and of course, she won by a margin of also 2.4%, the same margin that we saw for Mark Kelly in 2020. So Catherine Cortez Masto doing good in the fundraising. She, of course, has had 6 years to build up the bank, and so Adam Laxalt currently is the Republican nominee, and obviously these fundraising numbers are only updated every fiscal quarter, so we're gonna have to wait a little bit to get the most recent update. But Adam Laxalt, I would say that he is pretty mediocre. His stance on abortion is not going to be popular in his state. He has come out in support of overturning Roe v. Wade. That is going to hurt him. If you look at the latest polls released, it does show a pretty tight race. Masto currently leads on average by 42.9%. The polling really has been all over the place. I mean, there was this one big outlier poll showing Cortez Masto up 21%. 2 previous polls showed Laxalt ahead, but it was funded by a GOP sponsor. We also had a poll sponsored by a Democratic sponsor very recently, Future Majority, where Cortez Masto was up by 3%. So really the polling is very messy right now. We're going to get more polls out of this race. This is a very important one. If you look at the governor's race here in the state of Nevada, Steve Sisolak is doing better than Catherine Cortez Masto. A lot of these polls are funded by the same companies, the same polling firms. They poll both the governor and Senate races. So right now, it is the opposite of what we're seeing in the state of Georgia. The Democrats are doing much better on the gubernatorial level. I do think if Catherine Cortez Masto wins, Steve Sisolak is almost guaranteed to win his election. So Catherine Cortez Masto right now is very vulnerable. I would say she is the most vulnerable incumbent Democrat running for re-election this November. If you look at the 538 forecast, though, they actually give the advantage to Catherine Cortez Masto. They currently believe that Masto has a 51% chance at defeating Adam Laxalt. So I guess that is good for the Democrats. If you look at the betting odds in this state, I mean, another drastic shift in favor of the Democrats here. Look at the numbers just a couple of weeks ago. The Democratic Party in mid-June had a 37% chance of winning. Now they have a 45% chance of winning. So it is becoming a lot more of an even race here in Nevada as well. So this will be the final tilt state on this map, and I'm going to give it to the GOP. So looking at the 4 races in Arizona as well as Georgia and Nevada, I mean, at this point, these are 50-50 races, almost pure toss toss-ups, but I do believe the Democratic Party does have a slight advantage in 2 of them, and I am giving, of course, Nevada to the GOP currently. And so now moving on to the races on the eastern half of the United States, I'm going to start off and just keep continuing alphabetically. So starting off with the state of New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is running for a second term in office right now. I think that out of all of the Democratic incumbents in these 8 races, and the Democrats have incumbents actually in the top 4 races, the bottom 4 are all currently held by Republicans. Purely a coincidence, this is just put in alphabetical order here, but currently Maggie Hassan is favored to win her race pretty significantly. If you look at the race just a couple of months ago, though, it was very tight. So Maggie Hassan is likely going to go up against Chuck Morse. This is the only primary in which there's not a clear frontrunner on the challenging side. So Chuck Morse currently is down in the polls. Looking at the latest polling data here from New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan has had a pretty significant lead over Morse in most of these polls. However, the most recent one does show Chuck Morse actually ahead by 2 points, so that could be worrying for the Democrats, but we're just going to see what happens here in the next couple of months with what data comes out. Typically not too many polls from New Hampshire. It is a relatively small state, but Maggie Hassan is in a pretty good position. In 2016, she of course defeated a Republican incumbent, Kelly Ayotte, with 48% of the vote. It was the closest race of the 2016 Senate election cycle. If you look at the Senate race in 2016, Maggie Hassan defeating Ayotte by 0.14%. So the election was very close last time. I do expect Maggie Hassan to actually outperform her last race. I mean, that's not pretty hard to do. She won by just over 500,000 votes. And so if you look at the odds for this race, Maggie Hassan currently has a 66% chance at winning her re-election. 35 for the Republicans. I think it's clear right now that the trajectory is positive for the Democrats. If you look at this race just a couple of months ago, it was also a pretty even race. And so this race was actually expected to go through the GOP for a very long time after the 2021 general election, with Glenn Youngkin defeating Terry McAuliffe in Virginia. That was a big wake-up call for the Democrats, and the Democratic Party now is doing well in New Hampshire. Maggie Hassan has had 6 years to campaign for her re-election. She's raised over $20 million, and so I do think that it's clear that Maggie Hassan has a slight advantage in this race. It really still could go either way. It could get very, very competitive, but right now Maggie Hassan is favored to win. If you look at the 538 forecast, they currently give Hassan a 70% chance of winning. They believe Donald Boldeau is going to end up being the nominee, but they don't really update this when the nominees... But they don't really update who the nominees are until the primaries are decided, so we're just going to have to wait and see. With the New Hampshire primary, I believe not until September. And so now moving on to the state of North Carolina, where Richard Burr will not be running for a 4th term. So we do have an open seat here in North Carolina with Ted Budd as the new Republican nominee, Sherry Beasley as the Democratic challenger. North Carolina is still a race that the GOP is favored in. If you look at the polling average, Ted Budd is leading over Sherry Beasley. Beasley has only led in one of the many polls that have been released. This one is against Pat McCrory. So against Ted Budd, Sherry Beasley's polling numbers have not been good. But if you look at the most recent polls, I mean, they are funded by Republican sponsors, and so that means that Ted Budd is going to have a slight advantage in every single one of these polls released. So right now, Sherry Beasley is not doing that terribly if you just look at the numbers, but if you look at the polling for the 2020 race in North Carolina, Cal Cunningham was doing significantly better than Tom Tillis, and Cunningham still ended up losing his Senate race in 2020. Joe Biden also lost North Carolina on the presidential level, so the polls have not been accurate in North Carolina. They have been skewed toward the left. If you look at North Carolina, Tom Tillis ended up winning his re-election by 1.7% against Cal Cunningham. Yes, Cunningham had that big scandal, but still, he was expected to win even at the very end by a pretty significant margin. I mean, in the end, he was still leading by 6 percentage points in the final poll released. And if you look at the odds here for the 2022 race, the Republicans are heavily favored here, although 20% is still pretty significant. Donald Trump basically had a 20% at winning the 2016 presidential election. The numbers really not too much of a change over the last couple of weeks. I think Sherry Beasley is a pretty good candidate. Same thing though for Ted Budd, a lot more on the moderate side. So I think that it will end up being Ted Budd, but this race is still going to be one of the most important ones on the ballot this November. And currently 538 gives Ted Budd a 75% chance at becoming the next U.S. Senator from North Carolina. And so next up, in the state of Ohio, I'm going to go over Ohio a little bit quickly. I've talked about Ohio a lot in the last couple of days. Tim Ryan does actually lead in the polling average. This is because of 3 online polls released showing Tim Ryan up significantly. Obviously, this is good for his campaign, but in reality, it is unlikely that Tim Ryan is going to win. I think that he is a very good candidate, and I think that J.D. Vance is a pretty weak one, but in the end, the Republican Party is still heavily favored, at least right now. But this may change if more reliable polls are released showing Tim Ryan ahead, so we are just going to have to wait a little bit. I do expect a lot of polls to come out of Ohio. Ohio is still going to be a pretty important state, and so right now, J.D. Vance is clearly favored over Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan, though, does have a lot more money than him because Tim Ryan was basically the presumptive nominee for over a year now. The state is still very much a Republican one. Even though the Democrats won with Sherrod Brown in 2018, Tim Ryan is not a Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown has been a staple in Ohio politics for much longer than Tim Ryan, so we're just going to have to see what happens in the next couple of months in terms of what polling data comes out. I think the Democrats are doing a lot better than expected here, but right now it is still a very steep uphill climb for them, and so that is why Ohio is going to be lean for the Republicans. North Carolina as well. I don't know why I put it as likely earlier there. Now you have 2 final states left on this map, starting off with Pennsylvania. I mean, this is going to be the big one. This is the race that the Republicans currently hold, the one that the Democratic Party has the highest chance of flipping. It will be between Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman. Currently, John Fetterman leads pretty significantly looking at the polling average here in Pennsylvania. In money, they are pretty even. John Fetterman, I think, is a very strong candidate. He is the incumbent lieutenant governor, and if you look at the previous results here, it is pretty mixed. Both parties have done well here in recent years. If you look at the Pennsylvania polling here, John Fetterman does lead pretty significantly over Mehmet Oz, and looking at the betting odds as well, they currently have a 60% chance of winning. This was a very close race. I mean, the GOP at one point had a 60% chance of winning. Now it has absolutely flipped upside down. The GOP now only has a 40% chance at winning, and is now the Democrats that have that 60% chance of winning. So right now, Pennsylvania is trending terribly for the Republican Party. John Fetterman, I think, is a very strong candidate, and it is showing just based on the polling numbers. If you look at the governor's polls here in Pennsylvania, I mean, Doug Mastriano is actually doing better than Mehmet Oz. Josh Shapiro is the Democratic nominee for governor, and John Fetterman is clearly outperforming him. Looking at the 538 forecast, they currently give John Fetterman a 51% chance at flipping Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, I'm going to categorize currently as being lean for the Democrats, and I'm going to go over Wisconsin pretty quickly as well, a state that I've covered a lot recently as well. So in Pennsylvania, it will be lean for the Republican Party, with Ron Johnson favored over whoever the Democratic nominee is going to end up being. I think it's going to end up being Mandela Barnes at this point, but we're just going to have to see. She is in a pretty close race against Alex Lasry. The latest polling does show Barnes up by 2%, but that is just one poll released over a month ago. So right now in Wisconsin, it is going to be a race that the Republicans are favored in, but honestly, the state of Wisconsin currently is as competitive as the state of New Hampshire is for the Democrats. So based on the ratings that I've given to the key races this November, the races that are really going to matter, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.